right. Good day. I'm Tana Yasu, and I am doing work on my Uncle Joe Brazil's legacy. And I have invited Mr. Elmer Dixon to come and speak on his experiences with my great uncle. And first of all, Mr. Elmer Dixon, could you please tell us about you?
Okay, I actually my family moved here from Chicago in 1957, a long time ago, and we moved to the outskirts of the CD. I say outskirts because we were down on Rainier Avenue South. Actually, we were right on Hiawatha Place.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, where the artist lofts are today.
Dearborn,
Yeah, right on Dearborn.
Okay.
Dearborn, and that's where they have artist lofts,
Mm-hmm.
where artists can come and live and do their work. So we lived there, and then we moved up into the CD on 24th and Charles, and eventually up into Madrona. And I ended up, make a long story short, was one of the co-founders of the Seattle Black Panther Party in 1968. Went to Garfield High School, where we started the first high school BSU just prior to that, and so I have been a activist and revolutionary in the Seattle community for over 50 years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I always like to say I have grown up in the shadow of the Panthers because I was born in 1970, so I got great benefit from everything you all did. So thank you so much
Wow.
on my free breakfasts.
Right.
And living outside the red line,
Yeah,
so yes, thank you so much. So, and my great uncle taught at Garfield, so I was wondering about, matter of fact, with the involvement with the Panthers, and if there was any interaction then with Uncle Joe.
Well, certainly knew Uncle Joe and worked with, went to his classes. I think even more so, I remember him teaching at the UW, University of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I also was somewhat of a budding jazz artist back then. I was a trumpeter. And I actually played, of course, in the bands at Garfield, like the marching band. I was actually the drum major my senior year, but I also played in the jazz band, which back then was called the stage band. We were actually the jazz band, the stage band. And the stage band meaning that we played for the pep assemblies at Garfield. And, of course, I interacted with Joe. This is before we became members of the Black Panther Party, because I was actually the only member in the band that did this, but I had my colleagues out in the audience that participated in as well. I called them colleagues, my comrades who we had joined SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, after Stokely Carmichael had come to speak at Garfield High School in 1967. And we were trying to establish a Black Student Union, which would eventually become the first Black Student Union on the West Coast. And so the protests that I carried out with my comrades, but I was the focal point at that point because I was in the band. So when the Pledge of Allegiance was supposed to be said prior to the pep assemblies, of course, we all were able to participate in that by not saluting the flag or saying the Pledge of Allegiance. But when it came time to play the national anthem, then I refused to play the national anthem. And but the director of the band said I had to play because I was in the band. So I said, okay, well, I'll sit down and play.
Oops.
So like the protest, in the NFL today, I would sit and play my trumpet, but would not stand during both the playing of the national anthem and the salute to the flag. And so those, I'm sure that I had some conversation with Joe about, how to manage that, how to approach that. But I recall, and also my interaction with Joe would have been around, playing the instrument, playing and I ended up playing in two actually local bands that our band members were, we were all in high school at the time. And I played with the Majestics, where I was one of 8 horn players, and it was a James Brown style band. In fact, our singer was Michael Mitchell, who was he had a golden voice, and he was our James Brown singer. In fact, he could dance and sing like James Brown, and wore the mink coat and had all the girls chasing him. And we changed outfits like 3 times a performance a night. When we were up on wherever we were playing. So I know we interacted with Joe on a music level, because I also played with another group called the Regents, and the guy that had put the Regents together was Gary Hammond. You may want to interview Gary about interactions with Joe, because they were both sax players, obviously, and so interacting with Joe on a musical level was one thing, because he was such a great artist and had played with some of the all-time greats, McCoy Tyner, and I think he maybe played with Coltrane, and so when he was at the UW, they didn't want to give him tenure, so that he could become a standing professor. Yes. Because one of the things that they require is that you publish something, and he said, my resume of work with some of the jazz greats is my publishing. That's my work. Yes. My body of work, which speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. So we organized around supporting Joe and his tenure, getting his tenure at the University of Washington, which I don't think he ever did, which is unfortunate, because he was a great jazz aficionado and teacher and instructor. He was also, part of the movement, part of the struggle, because he expressed his frustration over the system and his support for quote-unquote revolution through his music and through his and that's how he gave back to the community, through working with us students at the UW. It was at a time when the UW was establishing the first Black Studies program at a major university, and he was part of that work, working with other leaders on campus, Dr. Jones, Al Black, and then I think Emil Petrie was part of that early work, all of whom are people you should be interviewing. Yes. As well as Larry Gossett, my brother Aaron, had started the first BSU at the UW in that same, I think, year 67, while I was at Garfield. But so he was just instrumental in so many different ways, because he had so much talent, so much gifts, so much history, especially with working with some of the jazz greats. And of course, for us, for those of us that were musicians, that was something very meaningful and awe-inspiring, that he had worked with these jazz greats. Mm-hmm.
And I understand he gave a lot of access.
Oh yeah.
He would have them.
He'd have them come. He would have them come to his class. So, I remember McCoy Tyner was there. I don't know if Coltrane came, but I do remember McCoy Tyner coming to the class.
Did you sneak away from Garfield and go to the UW and see?
No. The next year I was enrolled at the UW as a Panther. By that time I was a Panther.
Okay.
But of course I had a different mindset as Panthers. When I went to school, in my briefcase I had my psychology book and my 357 Magnum. Because we had to be armed, and we had, we had security, and I couldn't have a bodyguard with me on campus, so I had my own weapon. But so I mean, those were very volatile times back then.
Well, it's still kind of, it's
Yeah.
kind of raising its head again.
Well,
if it ever put its head down.
Well, I'm not saying that the conditions that black people face are not as difficult, and even in many ways more challenging today. All of the things that have gone on with the Donald Duck administration, and what he's done to dismantle programs and services, and the fact that the income gap between blacks and whites has grown significantly since that time. We addressed a lot of those issues through our free medical clinic, which is still running today. But I mean the whole, so I think on the whole, when you think about the struggle and the conditions that black people face and are challenged by, we have very acute challenges that black people face today, and other poor people. And I think in many ways those are more severe. And so any gains that we've made, we've taken 2 steps backward for every step forward. But the thing that young people don't understand about the movement at the time, it's very different. Because we were at the cusp, the forefront of the struggle for human rights, the Black Power movement, different from the civil rights. Now, civil rights movement was also at the forefront in many ways in the 50s and 60s in terms of challenging the status quo and Jim Crow laws and racism in the South and throughout the country. But we were anti-establishment. The civil rights movement was not.
Right.
The Black Power movement was anti-establishment. Well, it wasn't, that we were. It wasn't about integration. While the civil rights movement was pushing for integration, and it wasn't that we were anti-integration. We were anti-system.
Yes.
And so, because of that, and we took such a strong stand and defied the powers that be, and stood in the face of the government and said, we're going to come for what's ours, basically, armed to the teeth. We were armed and ready for revolution. And so because of that, the country was very tense because of the anti-war movement, what had happened at the Democratic National Convention that summer. Was an all-out, full-scale attack on the student organizers, and they were fighting back, the system back, and we were standing up saying that we're going to defend our community. We're not going to let you come in and murder our people and shoot innocent unarmed civilians. That we were going to defend the community. So it was a very different situation than it is today. To try to picture that and have that image. That same summer, which was the year we also started the Black Panther Party in 1968 here in Seattle, we were the first chapter formed outside of the state of California. We were named by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, as the #1 threat to the internal security of the United States. So they were trying to murder us. So when I say that I carried a weapon to school when I went to the UW in my briefcase, it was because we were targets for assassination. So it was a very different situation than it is today. You try to get young people to imagine what it was like then. Of course there are, guns have infiltrated our society, and you got gang members running around, shooting, at each other and often killing innocent victims. And so I don't mean to diminish what young people's lives are like today. Many of those communities are like war zones, but that's because of the proliferation of guns in our society and the deliberate delivery of those weapons into the black community back in the 1980s, and the drug wars were manufactured by the CIA. to let young black people kill themselves, black and brown, kids kill themselves. That has spilled over into some other communities as well. So that's a very volatile environment. But the environment that I'm speaking of in terms of revolution against the system,
Yes.
we weren't killing each other.
Right.
We weren't out to kill, police or the government. We were just saying, you're not going to come into our community and kill us. We're going to defend ourselves. And because we took that stand, because we said we have the right to self-determination, we have a right to decent health care, we have a right to food, we have a right to decent education, we have a right to be to not be murdered by cops many of whom happen to be racist. That's not all cops, so we were standing up against any of those that were. Because we took that stand, we were attacked like nothing has been seen since the annihilation of the Native American people during the genocide of Native peoples when this land was first occupied. And so we were fighting that oppression. We were in a coalition with all oppressed people, poor whites, black people, poor Latinos, Asians, anyone that was oppressed by the system. So the environment then was very different than it is today.
Yes.
If you can imagine the strength of a community standing up, and young black and brown, we were kids, 17, 18 years old,
Wow.
armed with weapons, saying that you're not going to come in and murder us, we're going to defend ourselves. That's a very different image than what you see today.
Yes.
You don't see anything like that. So that's why I say it was a very different era. And within that era, were the older at that time, they were the OGs. Joe was the OG, who could offer advice and words of wisdom when we accepted those words of wisdom. And so he was like a steadying force, because we were ready to throw down, right? So that's what I mean about the environment.
For another day. Hold on for you.
That's what I mean by it was a different environment back then. And Joe was one of those forces that we needed to offer advice, whether or not we would always hear it, but at least have it there.
Yes.
So that was important.
Planting those seeds. You
Sure.
plant those seeds and
Yep.
might not right away, but even, it sank in, and that's wonderful. You all had the foresight to utilize that wisdom so that you're still here.
Still here by the grace of God.
Wonderful. So I understand the Seattle chapter of Black Panther Party is still, going to be moving forward with things. I hope Joe Brazil Legacy can.
Well, there is no more Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party stopped operating nationally in 1982. That same year, in fact, in 1976, we had split from central headquarters and continued to run and operate all of the community programs. It was during that time in the late 70s that we actually had formed and restarted our original free medical clinic, which was named the Sidney Miller Free Medical Clinic in 1970. We opened the Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center in 1979. Carolyn died in 78. She was actually my right-hand person as we were putting that clinic together. But we continued to operate the programs up until 1982. We had 5 breakfast programs running across the city where we were feeding 2,000 kids a week, among a variety of other community-based programs. A free pest control program, a free prison busing to prisons program. We took the relatives of inmates to all 5 prisons in the state. We had a tutoring program in the prison. We had a tutoring program outside for young people. We had some of the first free food banks. Those were all Black Panther programs that continued to operate until 1982. So what you saw this year was a coming together of former members of the Seattle Black Panther Party to celebrate and honor to recognize, I don't like to use the word celebrate, but to recognize the legacy of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. So we had an organizing committee that is still operating. We're still functioning because we have other events that are scheduled. So we were able to pull off the first series of events of the 50th anniversary of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party, which, as I said earlier, was the second chapter formed outside of the state, outside of Oakland, but it was the first chapter formed outside of the state of California. So we were actually led the way in that respect. But we have another event that we're planning this fall, which is the Youth Engagement Summit for Leadership, which is the follow-up piece to our anniversary in April. It'll be happening in late October, early November. We expect to bring Bobby Seale up to speak, both to the general public and to the young people. But it'll be a one-day series of workshops continuing with the theme of the anniversary, which is past, present, and future. So that there will be concurrent workshops running on one day that students can go in and out of to learn from the successes and the failures of the movement, not just the Black Panther Party, but other local movements like El Centro de la Raza, or the group that was trying to establish the African American Museum, which eventually became NAM, and other organizations from the past will share their wisdom and knowledge. And then in the present, we'll look at current activities, current groups that are organizing in the community, like the work that Nikita Oliver is doing, the work that Joaquin Garrett is doing, the building of the Liberty Bank building,
Yes.
which is a low-income housing project. And then the future is going to direct kids to workshops that engage them in learning and developing programs that they can become active in, so that they can become activists themselves. That's the whole thing, is to inspire young people into action, to fight some of the stuff that's happening today, some of the challenges that this society is facing. So that's the continuation of our 50th. So the organizing committee of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party.
I remember you were saying we're passing the torch, and that's awesome, because so many people are
the torch has been passed. We're just we were working on this legacy and this anniversary, and it continues through this year. And
wonderful.
so that's what we're doing.
I'm excited to hear that, and if you need some music, I did create a Joe Brazil Legacy Band. I have
cool.
a 6-piece band, and I'm connecting with so many of the former students from UW and the Black Academy of Music, and we're actually planning a reunion for them. But it seemed like I put up Joe Brazil, and they're coming, and they're ready, and they do want to do something and honor the legacy and keep him as relevant as he needs and should be as a historic icon of Seattle, Washington.
Absolutely.
So I thank you, because like I said, I put up the name and made the call, and you all are showing up, and I'm just overwhelmed with joy, and I'm sure Uncle Joe is like,
well, we're glad you're
right on.
We're glad you're doing it. Yusef Lateef, Herbie Hancock, those are all the great names. Cannonball Adderley, Stanley Turrentine. I've seen those cats in concert, most of them. Yeah, thanks to Joe. Kenny Burrell, man, that's a name I haven't heard in a while.
So something else Uncle Joe used to do was film. He did a lot of filming, and I have his films that we are going to be working on digitizing, so that we can, share that and keep the experience, what I call the Brazil effect, alive and well and going with this living legacy, which you're part of. Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right.